In June of 2009, my siblings and I decided to flee Eritrea. Aware of the dangers that lay ahead, we agreed that this desperate leap of faith was our only chance to escape the makeshift enslavement that awaited us if we stayed. Unfortunately, we were caught. And as was common practice, we were sent to prison. The 2 years I spent in the depths of the countryside, moving from prison to prison and from farm to farm, doing forced labor, were the hardest of my life. These were the words of Anna Petros Solomon, the daughter of the late Petros Solomon, who was a commander in the EPLF. My curiosity about Eritrea began when I learned that it's the only African country that has not yet signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. This raised questions within me, questions about its economic policies, questions about its diplomatic stance, and the deeper reasons behind its self-imposed isolation. Welcome to the Serengeti Synergy podcast, where we unlock and unpack Africa's most pressing issues. I am your host, Mithamo Kinyo, and today we turn all our focus to a country called Eritrea, a nation that is often dubbed the North Korea of Africa. With a repressive government, indefinite military service, and near total isolation from the rest of the world, Eritrea's authoritarian rule under President Isaias Afwerki has drawn significant comparisons to Kim Jong-un's regime. But how did Eritrea get here? Let's rewind to the 1990s, when Eritrea's fight for independence came to a historic conclusion. Eritrea's struggle for independence was one of Africa's longest and bloodiest. The country had been an Italian colony from 1890 to 1941. Then it transitioned to a British administration and British colony until 1952, when it was federated with Ethiopia. However, in 1962, Emperor Haile Selassie unilaterally dissolved the federation, annexing Eritrea as Ethiopia's 14th province. This led to the Eritrean War of Independence, a conflict that lasted 30 years, from 1961 to 1991. By the late 1980s, Ethiopian forces were battling both Eritrean separatists and the TPLF, the Tigrayan People Liberation Front, which was fighting against Ethiopia's ruling communist regime, the Derg, led by Mengistu Mariam. The decisive moment came in May 1991, when Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, fell to the TPLF and other allied forces, including the EPLF, Eritrean People Liberation Front. With the Derg overthrown, the TPLF leader, Meles Zenawi, who soon became Ethiopia's prime minister, granted Eritrea the opportunity to determine its own fate. In April 1993, a UN-supervised referendum saw Eritreans in the country vote by a profound margin of 99.8% for independence. On May 24, 1993, Eritrea officially became an independent state, with Isaias Afwerki, leader of the EPLF, assuming power as the country's first and only president. While Eritrea's independence was greeted with a lot of hope and optimism, Isaias Afwerki quickly consolidated all the powers in the state, eliminating any and all opposition. Unlike many African nations that transitioned into multi-party democracies in the 1990s, Eritrea never had a presidential election. A constitution was drafted in 1997, but this was never implemented. In 2001, following the Eritrean-Ethiopian War between 1998 and 2000, a group of senior officials known as the G15 called for democratic reforms within the country. They were shortly arrested, and to this day, no one has ever seen or heard from them again. This shows that Afwerki rules with an iron fist, employing tactics that are quite similar to North Korea, one of which is indefinite military service, as I mentioned in the beginning. Eritrean youth are conscripted into military service, often for life, in a system that has been linked to modern-day slavery. Sarim, who was a former conscript speaking to the front line, described his ordeal as follows: "I did 20 years of national service. Being a soldier is mandatory. I had no choice. I hated the military, so I decided to leave my country. National service should have a time limit, but ours has no end. It is not serving your country. It is simply slavery." It is estimated that nearly 600,000 Eritreans, which is a significant portion of the country's workforce, are trapped in this system, and they are forced to work in agriculture, infrastructure projects, and even mining projects for little to no pay. Conscripts include professionals such as doctors, teachers, and even engineers, and they are all assigned state-controlled jobs, which essentially makes them government property. There is no independent press or private media in Eritrea. Private media has been banned since 2001. Eritrea consistently ranks among the lowest in the World Press Freedom Index. In 2023, it ranked 174th out of 180 countries, and this reflects the government's total control over all media outlets. The Constitution grants freedom of press, but this provision has never been enforced and implemented. State-run media dominates the information landscape, serving as a mouthpiece for the current regime and leaving no room for dissenting voices. Eritrea's government controls all information, with state-run media acting as propaganda machines. This suppression of free speech ensures that any dissent is swiftly crushed, and this creates an environment where fear and obedience dominate. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have compellingly documented severe human rights violations across various regions in the country. Individuals often marginalized or vulnerable are subjected to inhuman working conditions without compensation, coerced through threats, violence, or deception. These abuses not only violate fundamental human rights, but also contribute to a culture of impunity in Eritrea, and this makes the suffering of countless individuals even worse. Eritrea has minimum diplomatic relations and has been often accused of using forced labor to build projects, much like North Korea's reliance on its military workforce. The lack of economic integration with regional trade agreements like the Africa Continental Free Trade Area worsens the economic stagnation in Eritrea, forcing many to rely on underground markets and remittance from diaspora in order to survive. Eritrea's descent into authoritarianism cannot be viewed in isolation from Ethiopia's role. Following independence, the two nations had a very tense relationship that escalated into the Eritrean War 1998-2000, a devastating conflict that claimed over 70,000 lives. The war ended with the Algiers Agreement in the year 2000, but Ethiopia refused to abide by the border ruling that awarded the town of Badme to Eritrea. This prolonged dispute gave Afwerki a justification to maintain a state of emergency, keeping the country at a permanent war footing. Using Ethiopia as a constant external threat, he justified indefinite military service, he justified repressive policies, and severe crackdowns on dissent. Even after the 2018 peace deal with Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, which officially ended all hostilities, the Eritrean government has not relented on its totalitarian grip. Moreover, the Ethiopia-Tigray War erupted in 2020, and Eritrea saw an opportunity to intervene. Eritrean troops fought alongside Ethiopian forces and were accused of committing major war crimes in the Tigray region. This involvement further damages the Eritrea's alleged fragile reputation and reaffirms its role as a destabilizing force in the Horn of Africa. In 2016, a United Nations Commission of Inquiry accused the Eritrean government of crimes against humanity. This included enslavement, imprisonment, and forced disappearances, torture, and persecution. The Commission recommended that the UN Security Council should refer Eritrea's leadership to the ICC for investigation. However, the Security Council did not act on the recommendation due to a lack of consensus among member states and geopolitical considerations. As a result, Eritrean officials have faced little to no legal repercussions, and the regime continues to function with impunity. Eritrea's resistance to regional cooperation extends beyond just diplomacy. It actively undermines peace proceedings by fostering alliances with rebel groups and intervening in conflicts all across the Horn of Africa. The country's refusal to join the AfCFTA, despite its potential economic benefits, signals its unwillingness to integrate into continental development initiatives. Eritrea's authoritarianism is just not an internal issue. It is a significant regional and global issue. The country's relation with Ethiopia have been volatile. Despite the 1998-2000 war ending with a peace agreement, tension persisted until 2018 when Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed signed the historic peace deal with Eritrea. However, Eritrea's role in the Tigray War that followed in 2020 to 2022 exposes its destabilizing influence. Eritrean troops were accused of committing war crimes in Ethiopia Tigray region, intensifying existing fragile regional dynamics. For the East African as a whole, Eritrea's isolation and aggressive foreign policy presents a diplomatic nightmare. While Ethiopia, Kenya, and other countries in the region push for economic integration, Eritrea remains a rogue state, and it's very unwilling to engage in any meaningful conversation. The country even withdrew from the AU in protest to its policies. The diaspora community continues to play a very big and crucial role in highlighting Eritrea's oppressive system. It is through them that we were able to see and understand all the atrocities that are happening in the country. Activists abroad have continuously exposed the regime's crimes, calling for international sanctions and more robust interventions against Afwerki's rule. Despite this, the government has tried to maintain its grip by pressuring Eritreans abroad to pay a diaspora tax to fund its authoritarian operations. The historical enmity between Eritrea and Ethiopia remains deeply rooted. Eritreans still harbor resentment over Ethiopia's past occupation, while many Ethiopians view Eritreans' involvement in the Tigray conflict as very unforgivable. The relationship is quite fragile, and any misstep could reignite old hostilities. Eritrea's future remains quite uncertain. Afwerki is in his late 70s, and the question of his succession looms large in the country. Will Eritrea open up post-Isaias, or will the country descend into further chaos? And what role will the East African community and the East African region at large play in shaping Eritrea's trajectory? Only time will tell. That's it for today's episode of the Serengeti podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share your thoughts. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and One Africa.